What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is the Dingo Talk Alumni Tour. My guest this week is Jim Rice, class of 1981. We're going to talk about everything from his time at Bethany, a little bit of working as the sports information director as a student, and what he's doing now and how he got to that point. But without further ado, this is Jim Rice.
You wanna know by now. You wanna know by now. You wanna know by now. You wanna know. You wanna know. You wanna.
I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is the Dingo Talk Alumni Tour. My guest this week is Jim Rice, class of 1981. Jim, thank you for taking the time out to be with me today.
Thank you for inviting me to be here.
So we're going to do this the same way we do every week. Jim's going to tell us how he got to Bethany, his time there, why he picked the major that he picked, and some of his jobs while he was on campus. Take a break. We'll come back and we'll tell everything since comps. So Jim, fall of 1977, how do you end up here in Bethany?
Well, I actually grew up in Augusta, Georgia, so it was a 600-mile journey. My family is from the Midwest and Western Pennsylvania, and so when it came time to look at colleges, I just kind of planned this sweep up in that general area. My parents and their siblings and all went to a school called named Denison University in Granville, Ohio, and so I was kind of obligated to visit there. I had received some literature from Bethany, I think after I took PSATs or SATs or something like that, and it seemed interesting, and I had requested a catalog, and Bethany had a radio broadcast program, which is what I was interested in. And so when I scheduled this visit to Ohio, I asked my uncle, who was going to be driving me to all these different campuses, if we would have time to swing by Bethany. And he agreed. And so that was kind of the last stop on that tour. It was the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and Bethany had just had the first snowfall of the season. It was about 2 inches. It wasn't much, but for a kid who'd grown up in Georgia, where usually the snow didn't cover the grass, it was just kind of an awesome sight. And it was pristine because the students were on break. So it's just this wonderful white blanket over this beautiful campus, and it just kind of had this great feel. And I think I kind of started to fall in love with it right then. I hadn't even talked to anybody. It was just driving up and seeing campus. I was just like, I could see myself here. And I visited with an admission officer, and they had made available a math professor, which was originally going to be my major, and radio was going to be something I thought I would dabble in. But I talked to a math professor, and then I also talked with a gentleman named Jim Humes, who was in charge of the radio station at the time. And I just came away from it with a great vibe. And driving back, I was just like, I think this is where I want to go. And it worked out. I don't know that I made my family happy that I chose someplace 600 miles away from home, but it was just where I knew I wanted to be.
So you said you came in with the idea of being a math major and doing the radio as a minor or side project. How did you end up in the communications department?
Okay. Well, and my family, I guess, had a group of what you would call professionals above me, doctors and people like that. And when they heard I was thinking about radio broadcasting, they were like, that's entertainment. You need to have something else to fall back on. You can't go solo entertainment, which at that time I was like 16. So I said, great. And I just chose math because it was the area of study in high school that challenged me, and from which I got a lot of satisfaction doing it. But it was totally a random thing, really. But I did enter as a math major. And quite frankly, the first part of the sophomore year, the fall semester, my advisor in the math department called me in for kind of our regular chats as you have with your advisor, and told me how much he appreciated how hard I worked at math, but really wondered if that was the major for me. And you don't usually hear about a professor, I guess, talking you out of being in their department,
Yeah.
But he was being very honest and just said, you work very hard to get the grades you do in the math curriculum. And most of our math students don't have to work this hard, especially this early. And, asked what my career thoughts were going to be. What did I want to do with a math major? And I didn't have a good answer. I didn't want to teach. I wasn't, I didn't have some kind of side career thing that I was thinking about. And so he told me, just, you might really want to think about something else. And I was a bit taken aback because at that point I really wasn't thinking communications as a major. But I just, but I put some thought into it, and I was active at the campus radio station WVBC by then. That semester I was actually sports director for WVBC. And then kind of coincidentally at the same time, I was taking a writing class under an English professor, Dr. Robin Cole, and she happened to praise one of the pieces I had done. And she just kind of looked at me that day in class and she said, you're pretty good. If you worked at it, you might be able to make a career out of this. And it was kind of that epiphany that this is really where I wanted to go. I got a lot of satisfaction out of doing these things, and I had a passion for sports. And so by the end of the semester, I had changed my major and moved right along on that track.
So during your time at Bethany, you interned or were the student sports information director with the college. Was that just to get a different look at sports, or what was the reasoning behind going into that? Or is it just the work study job that you like?
A little bit of all of that. At that point, by the end of the semester, I was fully involved in trying to go into sports communication. And actually, Jim Cardy, who was the chair of the department at the time, came to me one day and said that the woman who was in charge of the public information office, the news bureau, as we called it back then, Miss Ruth Westlake, was looking for somebody who could help her with sports news media and news releases. And he had recommended me, and she wanted to talk to me. I had no idea what a sports information director was. I'd never heard of it. But I did find out it was 10 hours of work study a week. And so I was like, okay, that's not bad. And so I went up and interviewed with her and still didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But at the end of the interview, she said, well, I'd like to give you a try. And she said, we could probably work it as an internship if you like. And I knew that I needed an internship. So I agreed and started there. I remember one of the selling points for me, quite frankly, was it had an electric typewriter. I had a little manual one that I was doing all my college work on. So one of the deals I worked was that I could come in after hours and work on papers and such on the electric typewriter rather than my little manual. So anyway, that's how I got into it. I remember the first kind of release that she gave me. I worked very hard at it and turned it into her very proudly. And about 15 minutes later, it came back with more red ink than black ink. And she basically started that day showing me how to write news, I guess, and it was what it was. I thought it would be pretty good. And then suddenly I thought I was really terrible, but she stayed with me, and there got to be less red ink as we went along. And then after a while, she pretty much just trusted me, with the sports information aspect for Bethany. So I did that for 4 semesters, I guess, and really enjoyed it. And that is, I think, what really moved me from broadcast to print as well at the time.
Okay. So what were some of like let's go back between 77 and 81. What were some of the experiences like being at Bethany? What would the campus have looked like? What would social life have been like?
Mm-hmm. Well, as they say, some things never change, and a lot on the campus is the same today as it was back in the fall of 77 when I first arrived on campus. Moreland Hall was the freshman men's dorm then, and I think now it's faculty offices, if I'm correct. And the comm department, and I'm going to blank out on the name of the hall, but the comm department then is now a dorm. So, it's just kind of taken a reverse there. But, Greek life was a huge part at Bethany back then. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of the men and 67% of the women were involved in a fraternity or sorority. So that was a big part of it, a huge part of the social life there. Pretty much every weekend as a freshman, especially, you visited a fraternity house and tried to get to know people. The other thing was then, for example, I was on financial aid, and at the time, financial aid students could not have cars on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So once I got there, I was there. But on the weekends, there was also a lot of good entertainment, a lot of name entertainment, musical acts coming in quite regularly, guest speakers. The theater department obviously was very active, and so there were always theater programs going on. And one of the things that when I was in high school, actually my math teacher, who was probably the reason I started as a math major, but my math major teacher in high school just told me, he said, one thing you want to do when you get to college is take advantage of everything. Try everything. It may be a speaker you really don't think you would have that much interest in, but go check it out anyway, because you won't get that chance again outside of college. So I did try to take advantage of that and go to every concert, even if it might not be the kind of music I was into. Go to speakers in areas that weren't really me. And then I tried to go to like every play that the theater department put on, things like that. And then obviously I was very involved in supporting, I guess, varsity athletics and sports information, and then with campus media as well, between radio and time on the Tower newspaper. So I kept very busy. I had a roommate once who, after about 6 weeks, moved out to a different dorm, and I thought it was me. And so I was like, "Am I the problem?" He says, "Heck no, I never see you. You're always out at somewhere out on campus doing something." So it was very active, and I definitely tried to kind of absorb every bit of it that I could.
Now, you brought up Greek life. Did you get involved in Greek life, or was that not something that was really on your radar?
I was not at all planning to pledge a fraternity, and I really got caught up in it, I guess, in that final week. And I don't know how it's done now, but at the time, the whole first semester was kind of rush. And then the first weekend or second weekend of the second semester, everybody pledged.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just kind of got caught up with it. My roommate at the time was pledging and very excited about it. And so I did pledge. And it was just one of those things that after a while, I just, my focus was elsewhere. And I just felt like I couldn't really be that good in the fraternity, that supportive of things, and that involved in it. So I ended up depledging. So I was not in a fraternity, but briefly.
So in your time, there's a pretty big event for the football team. Were you there for the 1980 the PAC, I guess, the championship game, correct?
Yes, I was. Yeah, that was from that standpoint about as exciting a time as we had there, and it was a good time for athletics. I think overall, the basketball team, while we were there, made a couple trips to the NCAA tournament, and the football team won the PAC, went undefeated. And that was my senior year, and it was kind of special there because guys that I'd come into school with and known since the very beginning of the freshman year, just to see that team develop and there being the catalysts for where it got to be. Very exciting. We had an offense that was really what kind of for football geeks became known as like the West Coast offense. 3 and 4 wide receivers and a single running back. Things like that, and just record-setting passing game during that time. It was only a 9-game season, so I think since then some of those passing records have been broken and so forth. But quarterback named Jeff Beer, wide receivers Denny Williams, Dale Grosso. I think they're all Hall of Fame members now. But just very, very great season. Knocked off Carnegie Mellon, which was the PAC power back then. And like I think the next to last regular season game to clinch it, and it was like a 52-yard touchdown pass in the final minute that won the game for Bethany. So yeah, very exciting time. That year, Ruth Westlake, as a matter of fact, as I mentioned, who was in charge of the news bureau, she put out a little bumper sticker and other things on campus that we had. We were calling ourselves the Village of Champions because we just every sport was competitive just about that fall, especially throughout the year. Mm-hmm. So, and somewhere stashed away, I still have my Village of Champions bumper sticker. I never put it on a car. I kept it.
Well, Jim, I think that's a good place. We're going to take a pause, send it to
Okay.
Harry Chambers. We'll come back and we'll talk about that test that connects us all as Bethany alumni.
Okay.
This is the Dingo Talk Alumni Tour. I am Carlo Guadagnino, Jim Rice, class of 1981. Harry Chambers, take it away and tell us about your store.
You've just watched another exciting episode of Dingo Talk, recorded in the secret lair deep in the hills of Bethany, West Virginia. Let me give a shout out to my man Don over at Maple Shade Outdoor. He's got some great stuff going on over there on YouTube and Instagram. Please make sure you check him out. Also, now available as promised, we have the second edition Bethany, West Virginia Mushroom Capital of the World t-shirts and our Chambers General Store. If we don't have it, you don't need it t-shirts. Available in all sizes. So make sure you stop by the store for a t-shirt, breakfast sandwich, our sausage biscuits and gravy, and make sure to check out those daily lunch specials. Now back to you, Dingo.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is the Dingo Talk Alumni Tour. My guest this week, Jim Rice, class of 1981. We left off finishing up everything that encapsulated Bethany for the most part through the years. There's one last thing. Were you a spring or a winter comper?
I was a winter comper. I definitely wanted to get it out of the way, and so I decided to take it during January. I was fortunate enough that again, Jim Carty, the chairman of the department at the time, Dr. Carty during January term every year went down to the Southern Hemisphere and taught journalism to Spanish language universities. So his house was open and he offered me the chance to stay at his house and study for comps. So I did get a very quiet time to really focus on it. And there was another student who basically did study with me. So we kind of boned up on things with each other and felt like we got a really good base for it. And then when I got into it, it was still as nerve-wracking as anything I could imagine. I thought I was prepared, but it was a very big challenge for sure. Very intense, very draining. The time we had several days of written comps, and one of them at the time, again, because Dr. Carty was very big in international journalism, we had to take a comprehensive exam on a particular foreign press. And I chose the press of what was in the nation of Czechoslovakia, mostly because I had family from there. So I had to be prepared to do that. And I opened up the questions, and you may still have them. We had blue books that we had to do our comprehensive exam answers on. And there were 2 questions there. And I looked at them and I said, I have no idea how I'm going to finish both of these in the amount of time we have. So I just sat down writing and answered both questions and felt good and closed it up and went back and looked at the questions and realized I only had to answer one of them. I didn't have to answer both of them. And I was really afraid because Dr. Carty was very big on journalists being able to follow directions. If you couldn't read carefully and things like that, maybe you weren't cut out to be a journalist. So I was really afraid that I might get flunked just because I didn't follow the directions on his quiz there, but made it through that and went into orals, which was probably even worse from that standpoint than the written part. We had obviously 2 people from the department sitting in on the comps, and then a professor that I had a class with outside of the department. And it just so happened that it was a professor that my entire experience with him was for 4 weeks during a January term, sophomore year. So I had never spoken to him before or after that. And here he was sitting in on my comps. And I was very worried about that. And it was challenging because he did bring different kinds of questions at it than anybody else would have. But I went through it feeling as if I had passed, but you always wait. You can't be sure. And I think now they let you know pretty quickly as soon as you come out of your orals.
It's like a 5-10 minute, you sit in a room and you question your whole time and did you do enough, and then you get
well, we got to sit for 3 or 4 or 5 days, I think, and wait at the time. And you get notified by mail, I guess. At least I did. And I got this letter. I wasn't even sure what it was for. And it was interesting because it was just like a half sheet of a piece of paper. And then it just said, congratulations. And it informed me I had passed with distinction, which I was floored by just because I thought I struggled so much by it. But it really, looking back, it's an excellent experience. It's the kind of challenge you need from time to time, just to know. And I think especially if you're looking at going on to graduate school and things like that, it's excellent preparation for that as well. But it was very nerve-wracking. And it did make that end of the spring semester very nice that I didn't have to worry about it at that point. So.
Well, and the end of that spring semester where you start your internship down in Wheeling, or do you wait until you graduate to get down?
I actually started that senior year. As a matter of fact, I did a little bit in the spring. Actually, they had offered me the internship in the spring of my junior year, but I had no transportation at the time. I mentioned the whole thing about having cars and financial aid and so forth. So I was really very limited in what I could do, but I was allowed to, at that point, make a special request to be able to have a vehicle on campus. And that was approved so that I could do my internship. So I did that, really immersed in it. First semester of my senior year, the first night I was there, I typed in the results from the dog tracks that were in the area at the time. So you can't begin any lower than that, I don't think. And it's one of those little like stenographer sized typewriters that you used. And that's what I very quietly did, trying to make sure I didn't make no mistakes on the dog track results. But it progressed from there. Working on the desk there a lot, copy editing and doing those things, and then broadened out, included some reporting there as well, including I got one assignment to cover a Bethany College basketball game, which was I don't know that it means anything to anybody else, but that particular day, the star of the game was a player from Wheeling originally. So I did kind of a feature on him. One of my classmates, a gentleman by the name of Russ Rogerson, actually took photos that day, and we sent the photos down to Wheeling with me when I went to file my story. So it turned out that day we had the centerpiece photo from a Bethany student. We had my story, and then as it happened, there was a wire story from Alabama, and the reporter on that just happened to be a Bethany grad. So we had basically a front page dominated that particular Sunday by Bethany grads. So.
And then from there, you end up as the sports editor at the Thomaston Times. Now, was that always the goal, was to go back down? Because that's in Georgia, correct?
Correct. It wasn't immediately the goal. I was looking around at different, just wherever I could get a job, quite honestly. I went to Miss Westlake, Ruth Westlake, at one point, and just asked her, am I good enough? Because I'm getting all these rejection letters, and I won't forget. She had these horn-rimmed glasses she always wore, and she took them off, and she kind of looked at me through them, and she said, "If you're not, I've wasted the past 2 years." And so it kind of broke the ice. But then she gave me some tips on applying places. And then she recommended Thomaston because the editor there was a gentleman who had worked under her when she was the editor of the paper in Ohio before she became public information office director at Bethany. So I applied there as well, and they offered. And really at that point, I didn't have that much else going on. I'd kind of hoped maybe to find something in Ohio or Pennsylvania, but this became available, and I accepted it. And it was, again, I think every experience is a good experience. It was a twice weekly paper, about 5,000 circulation. And it was high school and community sports. And it was part of the photography. It was all of the layout. So I had to do everything, and I had to learn everything. I did that for a couple of years, and then was ready to move on, and found another job as a part-time desk person and reporter with a daily newspaper in Anderson, South Carolina, and did that for a year, and then became the beat writer for the University of South Carolina Athletics back then. And that's when I really started focusing more on the writing side. Did that particular beat for about 4 years.
And then there was a trip to New Orleans, right? You were an assistant sports editor at the New Orleans Times, and that word. Picayune, yes. And I used to know what a Picayune was, and I'm sorry I forgot, but it's I worked in Anderson for about 5 years, then went to the paper in Columbia, South Carolina, the state newspaper as an assistant sports editor, was there not quite 2 years, and was hired to work in Orange County, California at the Register, where I was on the desk, and really enjoyed that. That was two teams in every major pro sport, University of Southern California, UCLA, 64 high schools. So very, very hectic pace, wonderful time. But as you probably heard, Southern California can be a tough place to afford to live. I would imagine.
So there was an opportunity at the Times Picayune. A gentleman I had worked with before was now the sports editor there, and he needed an assistant sports editor and offered me the job. So I took that. It also moved my family a lot closer to home. So I was there, and again, a good time. The Saints were the big team there, and LSU athletics, but then also very vibrant high school coverage as well. So did that for about 5 years, and then basically brought my family back home to South Carolina as close as we could get. My wife is from South Carolina, and took a job with the Greenville News. And that's where I am now, 23 years later. Now,
what's a day-to-day like for you now being in Greenville?
Okay. We are part of the USA Today network, and I am now in a role as there's a fancy title for it, senior manager for content, but I basically oversee a group of sports writers for 7 newspapers in South Carolina, North Carolina, for the USA Today network. And that's kind of a broad spectrum of beats. That's high school reporters, and that's the Clemson University athletics as well. Obviously one of the premier football programs in the country right now. So it's kind of every day working, with some part of it. Some days are more focused on high school, some days more on the college. It's helping reporters with story ideas. It's obviously editing stories, and it's planning coverage. I mean, right now we're really involved in planning our coverage for the start of high school football here, and as well as with college football with Clemson and University of South Carolina as well. Just trying to have a plan for the whole season, and identifying the kinds of stories that we think our readers want, and preparing for them now. And we're very digitally focused these days in the newspaper industry, and that's a big change. That's really people read on the internet much differently than they read newspapers, and so it's providing content that we think will appeal to that digital audience first. And it's it's a big change for somebody who started out 40 years ago, when we didn't even know what the word internet was. So, but it's a lot of fun, a lot of challenges.
Now, would you say, do you enjoy covering high school sports any more than you enjoy covering like the colleges and the NFL teams and the professional teams that you've had the opportunity to cover, or is it all just you just enjoy being around athletics as a whole?
I do enjoy athletics as a whole. There's satisfaction in kind of every part of that. People are engaged in our high schools in just a much different way than they are anything else. You get that it's a very loyal audience that has been supporting their teams for years. It is parents, of course, who very much support their kids, and it's very important to them. And you have to recognize that, in your approach, that this is your audience and here are the kinds of things they want to do. We tend to do a lot of our high schools personality driven, finding the good stories among the athletes and the teams. It could be the star quarterback on the football team, but One of the best stories we did was on a volleyball player at one of our high schools who was born deaf, and just kind of her story and how she has overcome that, and it was an outstanding player for us, and is now actually beginning this fall playing for the University of South Carolina volleyball team. So just an outstanding story there. So, and that's it. You just try to find the good stories. There are a lot of them at the high school level, a lot of kids. We have in our area 53 high schools. And so obviously there's 20 something sports at most of those high schools. So there's a lot of athletes,
to pull from,
a lot of good stories. The college level here, and Clemson definitely has a very loyal fan base in this part of South Carolina and the South. And it's a very knowledgeable audience. They know their football, they know their team. And, we have to provide the content that respects that knowledge, but also, our goal with every story is let's tell them something they might not know. And that's the approach we take. We feel like if we can give people a story that, they're going to look at the headline and go, I might learn something from reading this story. That's the big challenge. And that's what we try to do every day.
So my last question is, if you were talking to a high school student today, and they may be in the class of 2022, why would someone want to go to Bethany? What would be the selling or the recruitment tool?
I'm obviously a big believer in the value of a liberal arts education. I think, there's great value in that, and I go back to, what I mentioned earlier, like what my high school teacher told me was take advantage of everything you can while you're in college. And I think that liberal arts curriculum gives you a lot of opportunities that way. There's just, it's very diverse and broad spectrum of things you can do. Bethany is just, it's a beautiful campus. It is, I think as the president of the school, when I enrolled, called it centrally isolated. But there's great value in that too. There's not all the distractions that, say, being in a major city might be. It's beautiful. I also like the idea very much of a smaller college. It's very true that when you're at a smaller college, you develop a much better relationship with the faculty, with your faculty members, and vice versa. I can't tell you how many times I had a professor just say something to me that just made all the difference, and that I knew them that well, and they cared. They very much do. You're not sitting in a dozen classes with 300 other students for 2 years. There's very few classes that way. Most of them are very small student to faculty ratio, and I think that was very beneficial to me. I think that would be beneficial to just about anyone. And it's just, college is the time, you have memories there that are going to last forever. And I think, people are a big part of that memory, and being at a school the size of Bethany and with kind of the care that you immediately notice from all the people there, the faculty and so forth, is those memories are just that much stronger because they're much more personal.
Well, Jim, I want to say again, thank you for taking time out of your day. I know with football ramping up, it's got to be a very busy time for you. Thank you for being on the show. This has been the Dingo Talk Alumni Tour. I am Carlo Guadagnino, Jim Rice, class of 1981. We'll see you guys next Thursday at 10 a.m. But enjoy, Chuckleheads.
You wanna know by now. You wanna know by now. You wanna know by now.